When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I didn't say a single word. I just stood there, holding my cup of tea, watching the steam fade into the air. She didn't shout. She didn't even sound angry. Her voice was calm, almost careful, like someone trying not to break something fragile. "Oma," she said quietly, "we think it's better if you go back to your village for a while." For a while. Those words echoed in my head. My son was sitting beside her, staring at the floor. He couldn't look at me. That hurt the most. Not her words, but his silence, because a mother knows silence can say everything a person is too afraid to speak. I wanted to ask him, "Do you think I should go to—" but the words stuck in my throat, so I just nodded. I smiled a little, pretending it didn't hurt. I said, "If that's what you think is best." But inside, my heart was trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking around the small room that used to feel like mine. The photographs on the wall, my son's wedding, the children's birthdays, all of them were full of laughter. But in that moment, it felt like those smiles belonged to another life. I remembered the day I first came to this house. My son had carried my bag himself. "You'll never be alone again, Amma," he'd said. I believed him. I thought this house would be my home till my last breath. But homes change. People change. Sometimes love quietly turns into tolerance, and you don't notice it until the day you're asked to leave. When I finally lay down, I prayed silently. "God," I whispered, "if they no longer need me, give me the strength not to need them." I didn't want to be angry. I just wanted peace. But a mother's heart doesn't forget that easily, and as the clock ticked through the night, I knew tomorrow I would have to pack my things. The next chapter of my life was waiting, but I had no idea it would begin with goodbye. Before that day, I thought my life had found its rhythm again. After my husband passed, I moved in with my son and his family. I thought I would be a burden, but he promised me I would never be alone, and for a while, it felt like a miracle. The house was full of noise and laughter. The children ran to me every morning, shouting "Nani, Nani," and I would scoop them up in my arms. Their tiny hands held onto my fingers, their little voices calling my name. It made my heart feel full, alive. I helped wherever I could, cooking, cleaning, little repairs around the house. I even sat by my daughter-in-law when she looked tired, offering her tea or advice. I thought my presence made the house warmer, happier. My son would sometimes sit beside me in the evening. "Amma, I don't know what I would do without you," he said once. I smiled, hiding the ache that came when I thought of my late husband. But in those moments, I felt needed, seen, loved. The routine was simple, but comforting. I had mornings with the children, afternoons tidying up the home, evenings sharing small talks with my son, or reading in the quiet corner of the living room. I would watch them laugh together, feeling proud and content. Even the smallest gestures mattered. A child climbing onto my lap, my son asking my opinion about the house, my daughter-in-law sharing a smile. I thought all these moments would last forever, but slowly, I noticed changes. Small things at first. She stopped asking me to sit with her during tea. My son came home later and later, saying he was busy. The children were quieter around me. The house still looked the same, but it no longer felt like it included me. It was subtle, almost invisible, and I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe they were busy, that maybe I was being oversensitive. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was shifting. And I didn't yet know how soon that shift would become a door closing behind me. A door I had once thought I would never leave. At first I told myself it was nothing. Small things happen in every family, I thought, but the quiet moments began to grow longer. The laughter of the children felt different, polite, distant. My son would come home and barely glance at me before retreating into his room. My daughter-in-law avoided eye contact, busying herself with chores as if I weren't there. One evening, I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. I could hear them whispering in the living room. The words were soft, but I caught a phrase that pierced me. "She doesn't understand anymore. Maybe it's time she goes." My hands froze. I felt the knife tremble slightly in my grasp. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to shout, "I'm still here. I raised you. I love you." But something in me held back. I didn't want to make it worse. Instead, I quietly finished my task, placing the chopped vegetables on the counter and walking away, pretending I had not heard a thing. It wasn't just words. Their gestures changed too. Plates were left on the table without asking if I wanted one. Invitations to sit together disappeared. Even the children, who once ran to me every morning, now hesitated, unsure if I belonged in their play. I felt invisible in a house I had called home for 6 years. I remember one night, I tried to speak to my son. Beta, I said gently, have I done something wrong? Did I upset anyone? He looked at me, his eyes full of awkward silence. No, Oma, he murmured, everything is fine. But the tone, the pause before the words, told me more than I wanted to hear. I began to shrink myself, quietly, without realizing it. I stayed in my room more often. I skipped meals so I wouldn't be in their way. I cleaned more than ever, hoping that if the house sparkled, maybe they would see me as necessary again. But the harder I tried, the more distant they became. Even the smallest signs of warmth disappeared. A smile that once greeted me every morning now was replaced with a polite nod. A child who once held my hand without thinking now hesitated before coming near me. I felt my place in the family slipping away, but I refused to accept it out loud. And yet, even with the distance growing, I kept hoping. Maybe tomorrow they would notice. Maybe tomorrow someone would say, Oma, come sit with us. But deep down, I was beginning to understand the truth. Love alone wasn't enough to keep me here. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the house feels heavy with shadows. I was in the living room, folding laundry, when I overheard them talking again. This time, I couldn't ignore it. She's too old now, my daughter-in-law said. Her voice was low, but firm. The children need space. They can't have her hovering over every little thing. My son didn't respond. He just sat on the sofa, staring at the floor. His silence struck me like a cold wind. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the agreement in that silence. The quiet acceptance that I no longer belonged. I didn't cry, not yet. I walked to my room, set down the laundry, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands felt empty, my chest heavy. All those years of caring, of giving my love and time, all those small sacrifices I thought mattered, now they seemed invisible. The next day, I tried to act normal. I made breakfast, packed the children's school bags, and even hummed a tune while washing the dishes. But each smile felt hollow. I could see the tension in their eyes when they looked at me, like I was an intruder in a house I had helped build. And then, it happened. That sentence I had dreaded. My daughter-in-law came to me, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, and said softly, Oma, maybe it's time you went back to your village. You'll be happier there. Her words didn't shout. They didn't need to. They were quiet, polite, almost gentle, but the meaning was sharp and clear. I was no longer needed. I held my hands together, trying to keep steady. My son looked at me once, a shadow of regret in his eyes, but he didn't speak. I wanted to ask him, why, after everything, but my throat was too tight. Instead, I said, if that's what you think is best, I will go. And I knew in that moment, nothing would change. The house that once welcomed me with laughter now felt like a stranger's home. I wasn't being kicked out in anger, not in any dramatic way. I was being pushed out by indifference, by quiet acceptance that my presence was no longer wanted. I spent that night packing. Each item I put into my small bag felt heavier than the last. Every photograph I touched, every little memento, seemed to whisper, you are leaving, and no one will stop you. By morning, the house was still. I walked to the door, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The sky was gray, the air heavy with rain, and as I closed the door behind me, I realized something painful but true. Sometimes, the people you love most are the ones who let you go without looking back. The morning I left, the house was silent. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual, as if they knew I was walking away from everything I had loved. I held my small bag close, my fingers gripping the handles until they ached. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. I paused for a moment, looking around the home that had once been my sanctuary. The living room where we had shared laughter, the kitchen where I had prepared meals with love, the hallway where the children ran to greet me every morning. It all looked the same. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. I wasn't leaving in anger, not with shouting or tears. I was leaving with a quiet ache that nothing could fill. My son stood at the top of the stairs. He didn't hug me. He didn't speak. His eyes, though, betrayed him. There was regret there, sadness too. I wanted to tell him, I understand, I forgive you. But instead, I whispered, take care of yourselves, Beta. He nodded, a small gesture, and turned away. I walked to the door, my bag swinging gently by my side. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the moment I would step outside. The lock clicked behind me. The world I had known for so many years was behind that door, and I was leaving it forever. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint smell of rain. I didn't know where I would go first, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was free. Free from the weight of being unwanted, from the quiet indifference that had slowly replaced the warmth I once knew. As I walked through the empty streets, memories of laughter and love played through my mind, the little hands of my grandchildren clinging to mine, the quiet evenings spent sipping tea with my son, the smiles, the hugs, the tiny moments that had filled my heart. And yet, I also remembered the whispers, the silences, the quiet distance that had grown between us. For the first time in years, I felt alone, but it was a different kind of alone, not lonely, not bitter, just alone with my thoughts, my heart, and the quiet realization that life sometimes asks you to step away from the people you love most. I didn't cry that morning, I didn't scream, I simply walked on, step by step, letting go of the home I thought would hold me forever. And as I walked, I made a silent promise to myself. I would survive, I would rebuild, I would find peace, even if it was far from them. Because leaving doesn't mean forgetting. Leaving means choosing yourself when no one else does. Back in my village, the air smelled different, earthy, familiar, like home. The house I returned to was small, dusty, and quiet. At first it felt too quiet, too empty. I could hear every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the trees. The silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket, and I wondered if I had made a mistake coming back here alone. I unpacked my bags slowly, carefully placing each item where it belonged. Even the smallest things, my old photographs, my few keepsakes, seemed heavier than I remembered. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking around the room that had been mine before my husband passed, before I moved in with my son's family. Now it felt like a room frozen in time, waiting for life to return. The first few days were the hardest. I woke up to an empty house, no children running to greet me, no warm smiles, no casual chatter from the kitchen. I felt invisible in my own space. Sometimes I would sit by the window, staring at the road, hoping someone from my family would come running after me, telling me I was needed, telling me they had changed their minds. But the road stayed empty. Slowly, I began to find small routines. I made tea for myself in the morning, letting the aroma fill the kitchen. I cleaned the little garden outside, planting a few flowers I remembered my husband loved. I began talking to my neighbors again, women who still called me Bibi, with warmth and familiarity. Their smiles, their stories, and their quiet companionship became a new kind of comfort. At first, I felt guilty for finding any joy. How could I feel happiness when my own family had turned away from me? But little by little, I realized that solitude didn't have to mean loneliness. It didn't have to mean despair. It could mean peace, self-reflection, and the chance to rebuild a life for myself. Sometimes I would remember my grandchildren, their tiny hands in mine, their laughter echoing in the rooms of the house I had left. The ache was still there, a soft, persistent longing, but alongside it grew a quiet strength, the realization that my value wasn't tied to anyone else's approval or affection. I began writing letters I would never send, telling my family how I felt, how much I had loved them, and how much their silence had hurt. It was a release, a way to unburden my heart without demanding anything in return. And in that quiet, empty house, I discovered something I hadn't realized I had lost: myself. I could sit in silence, sip my tea, feel the sun on my face, and know that I was still here, still breathing, still alive, even if they had forgotten me. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The quiet of the village became a gentle companion, though at first it had felt like a cage. I had time to think, to remember the laughter, the smiles, and the quiet moments of my life with my son and his family. But I also remembered the silences, the whispered conversations, the way I slowly became invisible in a home I had helped build. It was in that stillness that I realized something important. Love alone isn't always enough to keep someone where they belong. I had given everything: my time, my care, my heart, hoping it would make me needed. But I learned that being needed by someone doesn't always mean being wanted. There's a difference. I finally understood. I stopped blaming my daughter-in-law, stopped resenting my son. Their choices were theirs, shaped by their lives, their struggles, and their own perspectives. Maybe they didn't understand the pain their silence caused me. Maybe they never even realized how much they were pushing me away. I couldn't change their hearts, but I could choose how I responded to the life I was left with. I began small. I tended my garden every morning, letting the sun warm my face. I cooked my meals slowly, savoring each bite. I walked to the market, greeted neighbors, and listened to their stories. In these little things, I found pieces of myself I hadn't realized I had lost: joy, independence, even a quiet pride in being able to care for myself again. Sometimes, I would think of my grandchildren. My heart would ache for the little hands that had once held mine so tightly. I would imagine them laughing, growing up, learning things I wasn't there to see. And yet, even in that longing, there was acceptance. I realized I could love them from afar without being broken by the distance. One afternoon, as I sat by the window watching the sunlight filter through the trees, it struck me. Life had not ended because they no longer needed me. In fact, it had just begun in a different way. I had survived the quiet rejection, endured the pain of being unwanted, and I was still here, still breathing, still able to love not only them, but myself. I learned that letting go doesn't mean losing. Letting go means making space for your own heart, even when others cannot or will not make space for you. And in that space, I found something unexpected: freedom, peace, and a gentle hope that life still had beauty to offer. It took time, but eventually, I found a quiet kind of peace. The days in the village moved slowly, but they brought a rhythm that soothed my heart. I woke with the sun, tended my small garden, and sat by the window with a cup of tea. The air smelled of earth and rain, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like I belonged somewhere, even if it wasn't with my family. I thought about my son, my daughter-in-law, and the children often. There were moments when I ached to see their faces, to hold their hands, to hear their laughter. Sometimes I would imagine them calling me, asking me to come back. But then I reminded myself that love isn't about possession. It's about wishing the best for someone, even when they are far away or cannot return it. I stopped waiting for their calls. I stopped hoping for apologies or explanations. I realized that my life was not dependent on their acceptance. I had survived the silence, the whispers, and the quiet rejections. I had survived leaving the house I thought would hold me forever. And in surviving, I discovered something extraordinary. I could be whole on my own. Neighbors would stop by, bringing small gifts, sharing stories, or just sitting with me in comfortable silence. Their kindness reminded me that family is not always defined by blood. Sometimes, it's the people who see you, who care for you, who make space for you, even when it's inconvenient. At night, I would sit outside, listening to the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of village life. I thought about my grandchildren, hoping they would grow up, knowing kindness and love, even if I could not always be there. I prayed for them silently, wishing them happiness and safety. And in those prayers, I felt a calm I had not known in years. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still feel the ache of being unwanted, but it is softer now, more like a shadow that reminds me of how far I have come. I learned that life can take unexpected turns, and sometimes the people we love most cannot stay, but that doesn't diminish the love we carry in our hearts, nor the strength we can find within ourselves. I have learned to treasure the small joys, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the laughter of children in the village, the quiet moments with a cup of tea. I have learned that even when doors close, new ones can open to peace, to self-respect, to a gentle, enduring hope. And so, I live each day quietly, lovingly, and with gratitude, because even when the people you love walk away, life gives you the chance to find yourself again.